Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for joining me, and thanks to everybody that's going to be watching the recording a little bit later. I'm excited about this workshop because PlayLab is one of the tools that I've really enjoyed working with, and I've always been very excited about sharing this with students. I've used it in class for quite a while. I started using it soon after it came online in August 2023, and I think it offers some unique opportunities for students to learn more about AI literacy because they get to actually build their own chatbots, and you could build some tools and chatbots. That's what I want to outline today is to give you the opportunity to build some of your own. And we'll have a little time where you can try to build your own chatbot and see how you can tinker with it and play around with it. And I'll tell you a little bit about what some of my students have done in the past with the platform. First, let me give you a bit of an update about upcoming events. We have another public debate coming up on AI and copyright, and that'll be on Tuesday, November 18th at 3:30 over in Seco Beck Hall in the Weatherly Wing. And definitely encourage you to join us if you're able to, or tell your students about it. I'll have sign-up sheets for any student attendance to keep track of that. Always happy to do that. I'll have two more AI tool webinars this semester, one of them on creating GPTs and gems. Those are both tools to be able to build your own little chatbots on GPTs for OpenAI, ChatGPT, or gems on Google Gemini. And they're very similar in a lot of ways, but there's some distinct differences. And I'll be able to show you on both platforms how you can build that and share them with other people. Similar in a lot of ways to PlayLab, but of course you get the benefit of working within that environment for ChatGPT or Gemini. And then on November 11th, I'll have a webinar on Notebook LM, which I think is a really phenomenal tool. If you haven't played around with it yet, we'll talk about the audio overviews, the video overviews, some of the ways that you can use it with students and some possible assignments and so forth. One other event that I want to make sure is on your calendar and that you're aware of is our guest speaker on October 29th. And this will be kind of the big kickoff event for the Center for AI and the Liberal Arts. We're bringing in Dr. Alan Coverstone, who is somebody that I've known for quite a while from the debate circuits. And I knew him when he was a debater and when he was a debate coach. But he also has a really great background in education. And his degree, his doctorate's in education from Vanderbilt. And he's worked in public schools, private schools, worked with the Gates Foundation, and is now working with the National Speech and Debate Association. And I've worked with him quite a bit on some research that we've done exploring the ways that AI can offer some potential, some great opportunities in education, and also some of the challenges that AI presents. And so he'll be giving a talk on reclaiming human intelligence in the age of AI, plural futures for education and society. And that'll be in Ballroom C of the University Center. We will have a reception to follow, and I'll put out more information about this coming up. But strongly encourage anybody to attend that might be interested in talking about AI and education and some of the challenges that we're facing in higher ed as well as in K-12. So let's get right into a discussion about PlayLab and tell you a little bit about that. This is an educational platform that was created in 2023. It's a nonprofit. It was founded by somebody that I connected with pretty early on. He came from MIT's Media Lab and had worked in Teach for America and then helped co-found PlayLab. And they wanted to create a platform as a nonprofit ed tech that would provide opportunities for instructors to work with AI models, both for tools that their students could use, as well as to be able to teach AI literacy through the development of tools by students. And it's a really very robust system. It's one that has a lot of control and granular control, but really user friendly. They offer access to 20 different AI models. It's a completely free platform. And so there are some limits in terms of bandwidth, and it's not something that you could probably just run unlimited. But usually there's enough activity there and enough bandwidth that you're able to get by with whatever assignment that you're trying to work with. But it also allows you to control access. And it provides some really great instructor support. So this is one that I think is really geared toward educators for the educational market, and one that I think my students that I've worked with have really enjoyed, and they've gotten a lot of use out of this. So how do you set up an account? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a link with you all, and let me copy the team link. I'm going to put this in the chat. And what this does is it actually invites you into this workspace. They have it called workspaces. And so you can create any number of workspaces. I don't know that there's a limit to the number that you could have. And within that workspace, then you can invite individual members to join you in that workspace. And so I'm inviting you into this new workspace, UMW Fall 2025. And this should give you access to be able to create an account and then have immediate access to the workspace. there have been times in the past where the wait list to get on PlayLab was quite long. And this is one way that is a good workaround. One of the founders told me about. If you create a link and you invite people to the workspace, you can invite then your students in. So if you already have an account, feel free to just go ahead and log into your account. And you can probably log into the account. And if you click on this link, you'll then be taken to this workspace. You'll be able to see the same workspace and you'll have access to it. So I'll give you a minute. You probably just need to create an account very quickly. You can use a Gmail account or I think an Apple account or create one with another email if you'd like. Really, any access point that you'd like to work with. Now you'll see those of you that are here with me live will be able to see the members in the group. Once you've accessed your accounts and you've accessed this page, I'll be able to see the list of members that are here. You could also have individual member links and then invite particular members. You can search by email. So this is another way that you can control access for students in a class or a project that you're working with or other faculty. You could just give them the link that'll give them access to be able to create an account, or if they already have accounts, you can just put their emails in and you can send them a link to that as well. So hopefully you'll be able to get in. We'll see that there's some members here. I will blur this for the YouTube account so they won't have all of your email addresses, but you'll see this. And I wanted to show it to you because it's kind of important to be able to see that you have access to the role that you would have. I'm the owner of this workspace because I created the workspace, and you all default to having a creator space, which means you have a creator role in the space. You can create apps. You'll be able to remix apps and be able to edit apps within this workspace. You can also change it to reviewer or explorer by clicking on change role. And then I can click on any of those and give you different access points. And this is something you might play around with if you want somebody to be able to explore and to be able to look at the apps, but not make changes to anything or be able to create something. You can give them the reviewer or the explorer access to this. So some granular control within the workspaces. Now, another thing I want to point out about this is that you can always create more workspaces. So if I go to my workspaces, and these are all the workspaces that I have right now, I can create a new one simply by clicking on new workspace. I give it a name, and then in that workspace, I'll have that same access point where I can create a link and invite others in. So if you want to use one for different classes or different sections or different working groups that you're working with, you can have them each have access to their own workspace. The other aspect of this that you should be aware of is that once they have an account, they can create their own workspaces, any number of workspaces they would like to have. And the reason this is important, not to get too far ahead of myself, but it's worth noting right now. I mentioned that this is a free platform, and sometimes there are bandwidth concerns. Those are typically measured. And as with any AI platform, these tend to change all the time. So that's not to say this is still the way they do it or that they will do it this way, but they tended to measure bandwidth within a workspace. So I remember the first time I experienced this is when I had a class with 25 students. All of them had access to the workspace. They were all creating apps within that same workspace. And very quickly, within a couple of days, we had already used 50% of that month's bandwidth. When I contacted somebody from PlayLab, they were very helpful. They said, well, you can get more bandwidth by creating a new workspace. So each student created their own workspace. They were able to create their own apps within their own individual workspaces. And then they had their own bandwidth to play with for that month. It's not to say it's unlimited, but that's a good way to be able to give you a greater share of the bandwidth instead of having to share it with everybody in that same workspace. So that's a good workaround for it. Students can always do that too. Now, that'll be important when we come back to the review discussion, when we discuss access for instructors to see the student work. If it's in a different workspace and you don't have access to that workspace, you don't have access to it. So that might be something that you keep in mind later. So let me go back over to UMW Fall 2025. And you can access workspace members. I can look at activity. I can look at apps. And there's a lot here that I can kind of see what's going on. I can look here and see here's activity, for instance. I'm going to go back to the apps, and I'm just going to show you very quickly how to create your own app within this platform. Think of it this way. When they have 20 different models they're working with, it's almost just like having access to ChatGPT. And it's called what many people kind of call a wrapper. It still has ChatGPT in the middle if you pick ChatGPT as the model you're working with. And all you're doing is you're creating a wrapper that goes around it that creates some instructions for the way that users will access ChatGPT. So in this case, I'm just going to say public speaking prep demo. And that's all I'm going to call this, and just kind of whatever I want to call it. This is to help students with their speeches. I'm just going to make a very simple app and I'm just give it a quick description, a name. I can change that later if I need to. But I clicked on create app. Um, and it's taking a moment. We'll see. Once this comes in, now you'll see this is what the interface looks like to be able to work with the back end of the app. And there's a lot here that you can play around with. One thing they've added that is incredibly helpful is this button over here to the right called Assistant. And if I just click on Assistant, I can then have it's basically a chatbot that will help me create my bot. So it says, what can I help you with today? I can help you with brainstorming, provide feedback, answer questions. I can give it have a discussion with it about what I'm trying to create. So I'm going to say, help me create a simple chatbot to guide students as they prepare their speeches for class. You don't have to use this as an assistant, but it's a pretty easy way to be able to get some simple instructions and some guidance about how to put this together. Now, while it's working on answering that, let me show you this over here to the left. This is a text box that you can change, you can add. When they first came out with PlayLab, it was blank, and you just had to write your own instructions as to what you'd like it to do. Now they have this template, which is good guidance for what you typically would want to tell a chatbot to do. That you have things like here, you're telling this, what you're doing is you're telling the chatbot how you want it to act. So when you're saying you're actually talking to the chatbot. You're saying you're an expert in public speaking. Your role is to tutor students, and you're talking to undergrads. So first, ask their topic. After they respond, then ask what they need help with. Next, give pointers as needed. Now, I'm giving very simple instructions here. They automatically include some guidelines and guardrails, which are pretty appropriate, pretty helpful, avoiding language that might seem judgmental or dismissive, be inclusive in examples, provide clear and concise responses. If it's off topic, prompt users to return to the main subject and so forth. So that's one way you can just go about it is just type out your instructions. Let's go back to the PlayLab Assistant and see what it says. So it says you're looking to create a simple chatbot to guide students. Here you can get started by clarifying a few things. And this is really nice because it says you're looking for help with brainstorming an idea, you want a question, and it can go through and help you kind of guide what you'd like to do within this chatbot. So you could just go about using the assistant to be able to create it, and then you can copy that over to the starter prompt for your own chatbot. Now, I'm just going to stop here. I've given it instructions that you're an expert in public speaking. Your role is to tutor students. I'm going to try this out. So that's the design strategy. Here's what I could say for the public stage. Sorry, let me go back to this. And I need to launch it. So I'm going to go back into it. Sorry, I exited. I'm going to publish it just in the workspace. And this is one way you can control access. You can make it public for anybody in the world to see it. You can make it available to anybody on PlayLab, or you can make it just within your workspace. So if you wanted just people in that workspace that are invited, that you remember, if you own that workspace, you can control who has access to it. You can always kick somebody out or remove them if you need to. Here, I'm going to say it's published here in the workspace. So now if I go back to that workspace, and I see it, I can click launch. And so now here I'm going to see this is what the chatbot looks like to help students write their speech. I'm going to say start. It says, welcome to public speaking prep demo. Are you ready to get started? Yes. Help me with my speech. So first, let me ask you, remember I said you want to ask first, what's the speech topic? And then after that, you'll be able to get find out what they need help with and how you can guide them. So my topic is how to use PlayLab. So we can kind of guide through. Now, I haven't given it any other instructions. All I did is give it very basic instructions that you're tutoring students in an undergraduate course to be able to give a speech. And it's drawing from that model, that AI model. So it's just like if I went to ChatGPT and started with simple instructions saying, hey, I'd like you to be a tutor for public speaking. That's really all I did here. is that this chatbot is accessing that other model in the same way that if I just gone to that model directly. But here you put this wrapper on top that gives it some guidance as to what it should be doing and how it should be going about doing it. Now, that's a very simple first step. And that's really all you need to do to be able to get it to do some very specific things. And in this case, most of these models are going to be pretty good at offering that kind of tutoring. What I'd like to do next is have you each try to make a simple chatbot. Really, any topic you'd like. It could be something for personal use, for student use. But I want you to just go through this process of clicking on Create an App within the workspace. Let me go back over to the workspace and click on New App and create an app. Take a couple of minutes, just take a few minutes, create one, and then let's come back together and talk a little bit about what you're running up against. Now, at this point, I'm going to cut this part out of the video that'll be online, so feel free to unmute and ask any questions as you're trying it out. But I think it'll be really helpful for you to see that if you give it some instructions, and you'll see how well it actually orchestrates what it is that you're trying to get it to do. Yeah. I mean, generally, all you've done is that you've accessed one of these other large language models, and you've just given it specific instructions so that it's kind of like taking away that first level of prompting you would normally have to do. Just think of it that way. And I think that's a helpful starting point because once you consider that all this is really doing is that you're setting up a framework through which you access that large language model, then it kind of demystifies it. You can see it's just as easy as just going to ChatGPT and using it. If that's all it did, though, then you would just go to ChatGPT or you just go to Gemini or something if that's all you wanted to play around with. But what I wanted to show is that there's a lot more to it in terms of what you can play with and what you can access and how you can actually implement a lot of this because it gives you more granular control over the access to that model than you would have if you just went to ChatGPT, for instance. Now, there are two things up here in the top left that I didn't mention, and these show access to the kind of model that you're actually using and variability. Let's talk about the model first. There are a lot of models here to choose from. And many of them some of you probably haven't even heard of. DeepSeek, by the way, this is the one the executive order says we're not supposed to be using. So you probably shouldn't use that, even though this is an open source one that's run on the server. It's not actually running, I believe, connected to a Chinese server. But that aside, that's one that I would advise students not to use because technically we're not supposed to use it on any government, state government materials. But you'll see lots of different GPT models, Llama models, O3. And if I scroll back up, you can see Gemini. Claude has different models here. And they have one automatically set to Claude 4 Sonnet, which is just their default. And that's a really high performing model that's balanced between speed and accuracy, it says. For most of the time, you don't even have to change this. But it is there to change if you'd like to. And if you want to find out how to choose the best model for your app, they have a whole page that discusses it and it gives you a comparison for each one and what it can do and what the differences are. And that's probably a lot deeper than you might want to go with most assignments. But the reason I find this incredibly useful is that you can then remix the app. You can create another copy of the app and have them run with different models and get some comparison and see which one works better in different instances. It's also important part of the discussion for students to have about the use of resources. Some of these models are heavy computational models, and they use a lot of compute to be able to give you a simple answer. Others are more compact, and so they're really efficient and they don't use as much compute. And so I've had this discussion in class with students to say if you're building a chatbot that's just one person came up with one that was when I tried this a couple of years ago, they wanted to be able to pick the right drink at Starbucks. That doesn't take a lot of heavy compute to figure out which drink you want from Starbucks. They trained it on the different on the different menu items at Starbucks. You probably don't need a heavy thinking model to figure out which latte you want. So you can use a more efficient one. And that's helpful for students to see because they realize they have limited bandwidth for the month. And if they use it using a heavy intensive model for something they don't really need a heavy intensive model for, they're going to use up their bandwidth. It also opens up discussions about environmental impacts, about data centers, because if you could use the more efficient model whenever possible and it gives you the results you're looking for, that's the more responsible step to take. You could also then explore different models based on what it is you're trying to do. A reasoning model is one that is definitely more computationally heavy, uses a lot more compute, but you can do more advanced things with it. And some of these models are much better at doing things like calculations or mathematics, and some of them are a little bit better at being creative. There are different ways to play around with it, but this is a great way that you can change it and you can select whatever model you'd like to use for your chatbot. And you'll see in a minute, I'll show you how you can create a copy of your app so that you can create another chatbot that's identical, but then try different models. And that was one part of the assignment that I had, is for students to test different models and see which one worked best and how could they do it in a more efficient way. Now, another measure here that you never really have access to on any of the large language models anymore, Copilot used to have a button that you probably remember, it said more precise or more creative. What it was getting at is that you could tinker a little bit with how the large language model was going to be responding, how creative you wanted it to be. Computer scientists at large language models refer to this as temperature. It's also referred to here as variability. And what it's getting at is that the lower the percentage, the more consistent it's going to be, which means it's going to hew very closely to recalling specific information. The higher the percentage, the more creative it's going to be. So if you wanted to write really funny haikus, you probably don't want it set at zero. You probably want it set at 80, 90, or 100%. 70% is the default. And I remember I had a student in a class that created a chatbot, and he created 10 copies of that chatbot, and each one was at a different variability rating, just to see which one was going to be best to give me the kind of answers that he wanted. And when he tested this, the lower variability came back with really kind of boring results. It didn't really say a lot. It didn't go very far. It didn't really offer any insights. The ones that were at the upper end came up with all kinds of outlandish things and hallucinated all over the place. It was more creative, but it wasn't really holding to any of the data that it was trained on. He found, surprise, surprise, 70% was the best variability to have for that model. This is a great way for students to understand that the model itself isn't always going to give you the same results. Right? It opens up discussions about hallucination. The higher the variability, the higher the temperature, the more likely it's going to hallucinate because it's trying to be more creative. And when you're getting to a bot, depending upon what the purpose is, I had a student that was doing one that was making screenplays for student films. They wanted it to be more creative. They wanted a higher percentage. Another one where a student was trying to get it to refer to the reference materials it was trained on. They wanted a lower percentage. They put it, I think, at 50 or 60%. It was more likely to give answers directly from the research materials, the reference materials. This gives students access to controls over that you wouldn't have easy access to through a lot of the other models. Because they built this in this platform, it's a difference that you might not get in ChatGPT or Google Gemini. So those are cool things to play around with. You just keep them at the default for most cases if you want to, but you can always make a change if you'd like to. Now, I also wanted to show you that in terms of access, I showed you how with publishing, you can decide who has access to this. You have a QR code and you have a link if I want to share it with somebody else. If I keep it in the workspace, only people invited to the workspace, even if I give them the link, they won't have access to it if they're not in that workspace. That's one access of control that's kind of nice. And it's always to say to students, you don't want, you put personal information in this. You want to be careful about what the data is that you're using or what other people might have access to. Don't do anything that's highly personal or potentially sensitive. But it does give a little bit of control over access. As the instructor or owner of the workspace, I can also look at activity, or actually the person that runs the app can look activity on the app. Well, that's interesting. I don't know why I came over the Cloudflare. So because I created the app, I can click on activity and I can look at any of the users. These are all the users in the workspace that we have. And I can click on that experience, that interaction that person had with the chatbot. So here I look at it. This is the interaction I had said, yes, help me with my speech. My topic is how to use PlayLab. If I had 20 people use my chatbot, I can look at all of the transcripts of those interactions that they had. Now, this can be really useful if you're trying to get information about how somebody used it, what the output could be, especially if you're using this as an assignment in a class and you want to see how students are accessing it or what they're doing with it. This is a good way to be able to kind of follow through and look at that. It's also useful for students if you have an assignment where you're wanting them to use a chatbot and then to be able to give some kind of reflection to how they used it. They have the whole transcript of that exchange. Now, they would have that on a major platform, but here they have it for anybody that has accessed it. I had this experience where I was able to find, I should probably give the background. When I created one of these, I created one a couple of years ago as an advising chatbot. And I wanted to see how well it would advise students before they came in to talk to me about an advising appointment for registration. So I trained it on all the materials. And then I told everybody in my classes, I'll give you extra credit if you can get it to give bad information. How can you break the chatbot? And one person did. And he sent me a screenshot where he asked the question and it gave a blatantly wrong answer. And so I asked him how he did it. And then I verified by looking at the transcript. What he did is he said, for the next two answers, I want you to give wrong answers. And then when he asked the question, he gave the wrong answer, of course. And he didn't try to hide that. He did tell me that, but I could go back and see that in the transcript too. The reason I mentioned that is this is useful if you're using this as a tool with students and they have an experience, they don't get good information from it. You can go back and look at the transcript and figure out what happened. Some transparency, not full transparency, but gives you a little better sense about how that works. So that activity button is a nice access point. I want to go to a major information chatbot that I was creating because this includes a couple of other options that I didn't mention to you yet. Over here on the right, there are several different options. I showed you assistant, but there are references, and this is where you can have it train on specific documents. And so when I did the public speaking the chatbot, I didn't have it train on any other documents. That's just what the large language model was able to train on. Well, if I want to have it train on my specific assignment, I can include that under references. And I can add the reference either as a file, I could add it as a URL, or there's some other libraries they have within PlayLab, but that's typically not going to be, I've never used that. I don't think there are many assignments where you'd have students accessing that. You probably want to give them the URL or give them the upload file. Now, the upload file is typically best because then it's static. It has that document that can always kind of refer to and it'll train on that document. The URL, the danger there is that if the URL of the page changes, then it might not train on the changes. It might not see those changes, but it can still use it. That it could still use that if you want to. So what I did for this chatbot is I wanted it to be an advising chatbot, and I just created a new version of the advising chatbot. You can see here I gave the background. You're an expert in advising students about the CDS major. You want to offer guidance to which student courses the student should take the next semester. So I thought the chatbot should know about our major. So I included links to the course catalog and information about the CDS major. And each of these are different pages on the course catalog page. One of them is requirements, one of them is course offerings, one of them is description, another one is learning outcomes. I'll just leave these references and you'll see what you can include. But you can include files up to 30 megabytes, and then you can always delete them if you want to be able to remove one of them. I don't know if there's an upper limit to how much you can train it on. I think that the concern would be that it uses up more bandwidth because if you give it, a dozen different files to train on, then it's going to have to access those files and train on it. That'll use some of the bandwidth for the month. But this could be really helpful if you have something like, we'll see with the advising, if how that might help. Or if you have an assignment where you want it to be able to be based on a reading or an assignment that you have, then you'll be able to add that in as references. Now, Caitlin asked in the chat about how much bandwidth you're using. How do you see that? Unfortunately, they don't make that very easy to find. The only time it shows up is once you've used enough that it starts giving you a warning in the upper right-hand corner was my experience. You've used 40% of your bandwidth for the month. And I think part of that is that they kind of keep moving it. They keep changing. They want to be able to offer more bandwidth and more access. So my experience has been they typically will try to add more. They'll only let you know that it's a problem when you start running it out of it, or you start running out of it rather quickly. I think was the experience that I had with it. All right, so references. This is incredibly useful, and it's a great way to be able to fine tune a little bit what you'd like it to do. Now, you can then say in the workflow what you want the chatbot to do with the references. And so you can say, look at the courses, look at the materials that you have, and use that to answer this question or to be able to guide this discussion, for instance. Now, memory is another feature, and this is a really new one. This is one I haven't played around with a lot here, but other chatbots and other large language models, you probably have found that they have memory functions included. Like ChatGPT now is keeping a running memory, if you have an account, of different information about you. So it'll recall some of that information based on past interactions you've had, not just within one chat thread, but across threads. This allows you to do the same thing. So if you want the user's information to be remembered, you can give that information here. You can give those instructions. I don't know of a good use case of that for PlayLab because typically these are more one-off. I wouldn't be using it over a long period of time, but it is there. Maybe we can play around with it. And if you have ideas, it'd be interesting to see what you come up with. Another aspect here that it's a more recent add is inputs. And what's great about this is a way to be able to gather information from the user that you can then incorporate into that thread. They used to have this as a separate tool. They would call this an AI tool, and then you wouldn't be able to have it back and forth. Now it's all incorporated into one. And what you can do is you can add a short answer, a long answer, a drop down, a checkbox, or even have the user upload a file. Now I've added in a few questions here. So I have drop-down menus. When do you plan to graduate? Because this is an advising chatbot. And then also, which of these courses have you taken? I listed most of the courses that are required within the major, just as a test to see which ones they've had, and then to see how the chatbot uses that to give advice about what to take the next semester. So you can add more, you can preview them and see what it looks like, and you can see the drop-down menu here and the checkbox over here, so you can see what it'll look like. That's probably enough to start with now. Let me show you what this looks like, uh, and we'll test it out. Adding the references and then including the input box was a good way to kind of direct that conversation. Oh yeah, Kristen is asking about instead of references, can you have them use materials from a specific website? The way that I know how to do that is within references to add the reference as a URL, and then make reference to how you'd like it to use it. Now, one thing I'm unsure about is how far down in terms of link level it will go for that URL. When I tried it, it wouldn't go beyond just that initial page. So when I included first just the URL to, the course catalog, it's not going to go and read through every link that came from the course catalog and look at all of the majors. And even when I tried just the Digital Studies major, it wasn't looking at sub pages on that page. So that's why I have links to each of the individual pages, just to make sure that it's actually looking at the pages I'd like it to look at. All right, so now let me go out here and go back to the UMW CDS major info, and I'm going to launch it. And we'll see what it looks like. So I've added in this. Thanks for your interest in the CDS major. It can offer advice. I always give the caveat. It can make mistakes. Always check with your advisor before registration. Let's test it. So when do you plan on graduating? I'll say fall 2028. What courses have you taken? Public speaking, intro to rhetoric and communication, and digital storytelling. I'll just say that. Now you'll notice it includes that information at the top, but it's kind of ingested that information. So it should know a little bit about it should incorporate some of that into what answer I have. So it says, are you ready to get started? Yes. Tell me what courses to take in spring 2026. Now, I've tested that a couple of times. The first time I tried it, it gave pretty generic advice. It wasn't great. I tried reloading the links, and then the second time I tried it, it was a little bit better. But what's interesting is remember, it's always generative. It's always generating new input. So it's not going to be very static in the way it typically responds. It's going to be a little different every time. In this case, this looks a little different than the last time I tried it. So here it talks about recommended courses. It says small group communication, and I said I've taken public speaking. I haven't taken that, so it took that into account. Both of those are required. So it says, all right, small group communication. It follows COM 205, which you've already completed. Then it says upper level DGST course that I'll need, general education courses, and then it'll give you a balanced 15 credit semester. And it says important notes, always verify course availability, check prereqs, review the complete course catalog, meet with your academic advisor. I didn't give any of that content to the chatbot other than to say that they should always meet with their academic advisor. It included all of these other important notes. Now I could include them, but it kind of did that on its own, which was great. So now let me say, list the other courses I need to complete the major. This is pretty good. So it looked at the specific requirements within the major and knows that even three of the courses that were listed on that full list, any of the three would satisfy the digital component. And then it talks about the other upper level courses that I need. Now, it is missing out on the senior seminar, although I guess it's probably including that on 300 or 400 level. But it gives pretty good advice. Now, I don't know that I want this to take the place of advising, but including something like this to be able to give some initial feedback, not bad. And I think that students could certainly play around with it and find other applications for it. So let me stop there and see what questions you have about using some of this functionality or incorporating that into your own chatbots. This is one I haven't played around with a lot. They've been adding some more of these. They are currently only tested with a few of the models. Claude has the tools. They call them artifacts on Claude, but they're calling them tools here on PlayLab and with GPT-03 models. But what you can do is then have it actually generate things like charts or number lines or right triangle diagrams, scatter plots. This will use up a little bit more bandwidth. I'm not sure exactly how easy it is to get that to work. The one thing I haven't tested yet that I was really intrigued by is this export to Google Drive, which gives other functionality. If you have the input, the content from the chat, you can have it export to the Google Drive. Would be pretty nice. But these are all worth trying out. So maybe let's test this. Let's see what it can do. Let's see if I launch this. Okay. Now you'll notice here there are a couple of new options. The attaching a file I think was there before, but you could always attach a file. Like I could include a document that lists maybe in this case the courses I've taken or the courses I'm thinking about and have it review them and give me feedback. But it now added the Google Drive button. And so if I say connect it, I think I would have to create connections and I'd have to in my account on PlayLab create that. So I haven't done that yet. I've done that certainly on ChatGPT and Claude, and it works really well where you can have it access Google Drive documents or materials and maybe even export to them as well. But that'd be fun to play around with. Great. Other questions or comments?
How does this work? Can you have students collaborate together in this app?
Hmm. You know what? I've only used it with individual students making the bots. I believe, well, we should test this out. Like if you go and let's see, Caitlin, are you able to go into my public speaking prep demo and click edit? This took me back to all of my um, chatbots instead of the fall 2025. So I think that if you're in the workspace and you're given the right control in terms of as creator or somebody that can access and create their own apps, you should be able to edit each other's chatbots, which would allow them to collaborate. Did that work for you, Caitlin?
Yeah, let me click edit and I'm in your app and I could be messing with the commands and things. So awesome.
Good. And I would probably recommend then maybe the students create their own workspace. Like if we have a small group, four or five of them, have them create their own workspace. Make sure they each have owner or creator roles, and then they would be able to edit them. If I just have, like, let's say if I change yours to reviewer, now refresh the page, and I think it'll limit whether or not you're able to edit. You can go in and view them. You could probably launch them, but you're not able to edit them. So that gives you other control over who has access to it. I don't know that you have to worry too much about students going in and messing around with each other's chatbots, but that would give you access to let them collaborate or to be able to access each other's editing functions or limit that functionality if you wanted to. Now, the other thing I wanted to show you is the ability to what they call remix. And so I'm going to try this with Caitlin's DGST 101. And all you have to do is click on the three buttons up here, click on remix, and it basically copies that chatbot. And I can give it a new name. I'm going to leave it as remix DGST 101 demo. And actually, I should have put it in a different workspace. So it's now not in the same workspace that we're in right now, but it gives me access to it. So what could I do with this? Well, one thing I could do is it has all the same instructions. I've tested it with references. It does include references that are URLs. So if you had URLs that were listed as references on your chatbot and I remixed it, it would copy those over. It doesn't copy over the PDFs or the files that have been uploaded. So that might be something else you'd play around with. But what could I do with this? The other thing that's kind of cool is I could go through and say, all right, I'm going to try it, but Caitlin has it as Claude 4 Sonnet. I'm going to change it to GPT-5. And I'm going to see what that might look like. And so this is an easy way to be able to create multiple copies of the same chatbot, try them with different models, try them with different variability, be able to try it with different references and to be able to test it out in different ways. And you can always delete it. You can always just get rid of it or limit access to it. And it's a good way to be able to do different tinkering without having to, go back over your tracks if you're trying to go back to some earlier version that you had of it. Now, the last thing I probably should note here is that when you're looking at it, a couple of different organizational things to keep in mind. You can always click on the star, and then you have your starred apps. You have your own apps, and this is across workspaces. You can see recently used, which ones you've used, and then you can always go into your workspaces and then access this. And as I mentioned before, you can always create a new workspace and then use that space and the bandwidth in that space to be able to try your own app or to test it out or work in a smaller group.
If folks have questions about the app, I'm happy to default to that. But I'm curious what advice you have for writing assignments using PlayLab. How do we help students not just be overwhelmed by like go in and build a thing? Like, how do you help them get into the weeds a bit?
No, that's great. I mean, there are a couple of things that I've tried to do when I share this with students. I mean, I've been using them primarily in classes where it's working on AI literacy. So more of the emphasis has been on kind of the tinkering with it, looking at variability, different models, and so forth. But it can be overwhelming. I mean, when you look at it, there's so many different functions there. But that's part of the reason why with you all, I did the same thing with students. I showed them the very basic functionality, have them create a bot without looking at changing models, variability, references, tools, any of that. Just create a simple bot. And then once they see that they can do that and it's not going to hurt anything, it's not going to be too difficult to do that, then they can start to tinker with it and play around with it. I always remind them that the only cost to any of it is the bandwidth. You're not going to break anything. As long as you're being responsible and not putting in irresponsible content, you're not going to do anything that's harmful. You can be able to create some of these chatbots. You can do some different things with it, and you can always delete it if you're not happy with it. So they don't really have a lot to lose. And even if they run out of bandwidth, they can create a new workspace and they can start playing around with it there. I think the biggest thing is just to get them to play with it. And what I found is that once they create their first very simple chatbot, then they can see, okay, this is fairly intuitive. I can start playing around with it. And when it doesn't do what you want it to do, then they can try to fix it. What I like about that, though, is that it reinforces that these are fallible models. The large language models don't always come up with the right answer. They don't always give you what you're looking for. And that's a really important lesson for them to see and to learn is that it's just some technology that sometimes lightning strikes the way you want it to. And maybe you can get it to do that more often because you're able to set up the system prompt correctly and get the right model and the right variability. But it's not something you just defer to, and you have to recognize it's likely to make mistakes. And it takes away some of that aura of invincibility or infallibility that I think too many students kind of defer to. Other questions or comments? Is there anything else that you're wondering about or aren't sure about with using PlayLab? And I know it is a lot there, and they're always adding more functions. But you can also see many of them you can just ignore if you want to. You can just do it very simply using the assistant or just adding in simple instructions, and you can make an app and test it out, and then share it with others and see what you can do with it.
So students can copy my app and kind of get that into their workshop. Let's say it's an assignment help app or the final project app, and it asks series of questions, and I want students, all of them, to kind of follow that and with the answers create their final app. So rather than them doing in my workspace, they simply copy it, do it in their workspace, and I mean, it
So
doesn't
yeah,
help them build app, but there is something that.
yeah, so I think I understand what you're asking. The concern that it's if they can just copy your app, remix the app, then it's difficult to give them the assignment to create what it is that you're trying to model with your own. I mean, in that case, I wouldn't share with them. Don't give them access to the workspace for your app. But it's also important to remember one thing about PlayLab is that's really built on this idea of collaboration. So it's easy. It's meant to be very easy to remix somebody else's app that they might have built. So in that sense, I probably wouldn't build the assessment around what they're building to be able to follow a particular path. I would probably build it into here's an example of something I've done. I'm looking for you to do something different, and to be able to do something more novel, perhaps, in the way that you apply it or include different kinds of information. So that is important to remember. You know, they have access to look at what's kind of working in terms of the system instructions. They won't have access to all the references. And if you do set it up, I was going to say, I think you can set it up so that they don't have access to the workspace, but you can make your app available for them to see. But if they have a PlayLab account, I believe they can always remix the base, and which means copying the basic system prompt to be able to create their own. Can you delete an app? That's a good question. I'm trying to remember there was, let me go back to, I don't want to delete somebody else's. If I go back in, I believe I can. I can always go back and say not published. so I can take it out of publication so others won't access it outside. Um, I thought there was a way to delete it. And I think they've moved that, so I'm not certain, to be honest. Oh, you can archive it. So if I put the name of it, there you go. Yeah, so that is the way to do it. Go to archive the app, and then you have to type in the name of it to be able to delete it. I've had the bad habit of just creating more workspaces instead of deleting old apps, so I just have a lot of old ones sitting there. What I really like about this platform is it gives students the chance to be really creative. And most of the students that have played with it start thinking about all kinds of different applications and always trying to tweak it and make it better and to get better outputs. And it's interesting to see what they come up with, both to see the variability functions, the model functions, but also how can they get better prompts? How can they better communicate to the large language model what it is that they're looking for? Any other questions or comments? So the other thing, and thank you, Patricia, for noting this in the chat. And what's nice about PlayLab is it gives you access to all these other models too. So you have access to some of the best Claude models. Those are some of the most cutting edge. ChatGPT 5 is available there. And while you have free access to that on ChatGPT, you can't easily change variability or give it a system prompt in the same way. So this gives you access to a lot of open source models, different comparative models, and you can test out what the output would look like. Excellent. Well, I hope this has been useful and helpful. I would encourage you to try it out a little bit more. It's fun to play around with it. You'll be able to find some apps that might be of use for your own purposes. And it's great to be able to incorporate into class for students to get a sense of how this might work. It's a fairly, I would never say anything is completely safe in terms of putting information online, but it is a safer option as far as creating a sandbox where they can create a workspace that only people that they give access to have access to those documents, those apps, those materials, and that they can experiment with it and try to be creative in different applications and different chatbots that they might be able to work with. And what I found was the easiest way to get students to be reflective about their own practices with AI models is to use PlayLab, because if they started using a large language model and they were just a little too carried away with how good it was, they didn't get a sense of how fallible it is or how easily you could make a mistake. With PlayLab, they saw that because they were able to see I wasn't able to get it to do exactly what I was looking for. And they could see how easy it is to be able to manipulate different things by model and variability and to be able to include different functionalities. So it gave them a better sense of being reflective of their own practices, some of the limitations of large language models, and then on the positive side of being more creative and interested in what they could try to apply. Excellent. Well, it's just about the end of the hour. I will stick around if there are any other questions, but thanks so much to all of you that joined me live. And for anybody that watched us online, feel free to reach out if you have questions, if you'd like a link to be able to access PlayLab and to be able to get into one of the workspaces. And I'm happy to send that to anybody at UMW. And I look forward to seeing you at one of the upcoming AI tool webinars and one of the other events on campus. Thanks, everybody.